Chapter 8. Ghosts. Ufrith didn't look much like it used to. Of course, the last time Logen had seen the place had been years ago, at night, after the siege. Crowds of Bethod's carls wandering the streets shouting, and singing, and drinking, looking for folk to rob and rape, setting fire to anything that would hold a flame. Logen remembered lying in that room after head-beaten 3 trees, crying and gurgling at the pain all through him. He remembered scowling out the window, and seeing the glow from the flames, listening to the screams over the town, wishing he was out there making mischief, and wondering if he'd ever stand up again. It was different now, with the Union in charge, but it wasn't so very much more organized. The grey harbor was choked with ships too big for the wharves. Soldiers swarmed through the narrow streets, dropping gear all over. Carts and mules and horses, all loaded down and piled up, tried to shove a way through the press. Wounded limped on crutches down towards the docks, or were carried on stretchers through the spotting drizzle. Bloody bandages stared at wide-eyed by the fresh-faced lads going the other way. Here and there, looking greatly puzzled at this mighty flood of strange people sweeping through their town, some northerner was standing in a doorway. Women mostly, and children, and old men. Logen walked fast up the sloping streets, pushing through the crowds with his head down and his hood up. He kept his fists bunched at his sides, so no one would see the stump of his missing finger. He kept the sword that Bayaz had given him wrapped up in a blanket on his back, under his pack, where it wouldn't make anyone nervous. All the same, his shoulders prickled every step of the way. He was waiting to hear someone shout, "It's the bloody 9!" He was waiting for folk to start running, screaming, pelting him with rubbish, faces all stamped with horror. But no one did. One more figure that didn't belong was nothing to look at in all that damp chaos. And if anyone might have known him here, they weren't looking for him. Most likely they'd all heard he went back to the mud, far away, and were good and glad about it too. Still, there was no point staying longer than he had to. He strode up to a Union officer who looked as if he might be in charge of something, pushed his hood back and tried to put a smile on his face. He got a scornful look for his trouble. "We've no work for you if that's what you're looking for. You don't have my kind of work." Logen held out the letter that Bayaz had given him. The man unfolded it and looked it over. He frowned and read it again. Then he looked doubtfully up at Logen, mouth working. "Well then, I see." He pointed towards a crowd of young men, standing nervous and uncertain a few strides away, huddled miserably together as the rain started to thicken up. "There's a convoy of reinforcements leaving for the front this afternoon. You can travel with us." Fair enough. They didn't look like they'd be much reinforcement, those scared-seeming lads, but that didn't matter to him. He didn't much care who he traveled with, as long as they were pointed at Bethod. The trees clattered by on either side of the Rodham green and black, full of shadows. Full of surprises, maybe. It was a tough way to travel. Tough on the hands from clinging to the rail all the way, even tougher on the arse from bouncing and jolting on that hard seat. But they were getting there, gradually, and Logen reckoned that was the main thing. There were more carts behind, spread out in a slow line along the road, loaded down with men, food, clothes, weapons, and all the stuff you need to make a war. Each one had a lamp lit, hanging up near the front, so there was a trail of bobbing lights in the dull dusk, down into the valley and up the far slope, marking out the path of the road they'd followed through the woods. Logen turned and looked at the Union boys, gathered up in a clump near the front of the cart, 9 of them, all jolting and swaying about together with the jumping of the axles, and all keeping as well clear of him as they could. "You seen scars like that on a man before?" one muttered, not guessing he could speak their tongue. "Who is he anyway?" "Dunno." "A Northman, I guess. I can see he's a Northman, idiot. I mean, what's he doing here with us? Maybe he's a scout. Big bastard for a scout, ain't he?" Logen grinned to himself as he watched the trees roll past. He felt the cool breeze on his face, smelled the mist, the earth, the cold, wet air. He never would have thought he'd be happy to be back in the north, but he was. It was good, after all that time a stranger, to be in a place where he knew the rules. They camped out on the road, the 10 of them, one group out of many, strung out through the woods, each one clustered close to their cart. 9 lads on one side of a big fire, a pot of stew bubbling over the top of it, and giving off a fine-smelling steam. Logen watched them stirring it, talking to each other about home, and what was coming, and how long they'd be out there. After a while, one of them started spooning the food out into bowls and handing them round. He looked over at Logen, once he was done with the rest, then served up one more. He edged over like he was coming at a wolf's cage. He held the bowl out at arm's length. Stew? He opened his mouth up wide and pointed into it with his free hand. Thanks, friend, said Logen as he took the bowl. But I know where to put it. The lads all stared at him. A row of worried-looking faces, lit up flickering yellow on the far side of the fire, more suspicious than ever at him speaking their language. You talk common. You kept that quiet, didn't you? Best to seem less than you are, in my experience. If you say so, said the lad who'd given him the bowl. What's your name, then? Logen wondered for a moment if he should make up a lie, some nothing name that no one could have heard of. But he was who he was, and sooner or later someone would know him. That, and he'd never been much at lying. Logen Ninefingers, they call me. Logen Ninefingers, they call me. The lads looked blank. They'd never heard of him, and why would they have? A bunch of farmers' sons from far away in the sunny Union. They looked like they barely knew their own names. What are you here for? One of them asked him. Same as you. I'm here to kill. The boys looked a bit nervy at that. Not you, don't worry. I've got some scores to settle. He nodded off up the road, with Bethod. The lads exchanged some glances, then one of them shrugged. Well, as long as you're on our side, I guess, he got and dragged a bottle out of his pack. You want a drink? Well, now. Logen grinned and held out his cup. I've never yet said no to that. He knocked it down in one, smacked his lips as he felt it warming his gullet. The lad poured him another. Thanks. Best not give me too much, though. Why? He asked. Will you kill us, then? Kill you, if you're lucky, and if we're not. Logen grinned over his mug. I'll sing. The lad cracked a smile at that, and one of his mates started laughing. Next moment, an arrow hissed into his side, and he coughed blood down his shirt, the bottle dropping on the grass, wine gurgling out in the dark. Another boy had a shaft sticking in his thigh. He sat there, frozen, staring down at it. Where did that then everyone was shouting, fumbling for weapons or throwing themselves flat on their faces? A couple more arrows whizzed over, one clattering into the fire and sending up a shower of sparks. Logen threw his stew away, snatched up his sword, and started running. He blundered into one of the boys on the way and knocked him on his face, slipped and slid, righted himself and ran full tilt for the trees where the arrow came from. It was run right at them or run away, and he made the choice without thinking. Sometimes it doesn't matter too much what choice you make, as long as you make it quick and stick to it. Logen saw one of the archers as he rushed up close, a flash of his pale skin in the darkness as he reached for another arrow. He pulled the maker's sword from its tattered sheath and let go a fighting roar. The bowman could have got his arrow away before Logen was on him, most likely. But it would have been a close thing, and in the end he didn't have the bones to stand there waiting. Not many men can weigh their choices properly while death comes racing up at them. He dropped the bow too late and turned to run, and Logen hacked him in the back before he got more than a stride or two, knocked him screaming into the bushes. He dragged himself round face up, all tangled in the brush, screeching and fumbling for a knife. Still alive, Logen mouthed to himself, squatting down low beside the corpse, straining into the darkness. It would probably have been better for all concerned if he'd run the other way, but it was a bit late for that. Probably have been better if he'd stayed in Adua, but it was a bit late for that too. Bloody north, he cursed in a whisper. If he let these bastards go, they'd be making mischief all the way to the front, and Logen wouldn't get a wink of sleep for worrying, aside from the good chance of an arrow in his face. Better odds coming for them than waiting for them to come to him. A lesson he'd learned from hard experience. He could hear the rest of the ambush crashing away through the brush, and he set out after them, fist clenched tight round the grip of his sword. He felt his way between the trunks, keeping his distance. The light of the fire and the noise of the Union boys shouting dwindled behind him, until he was deep in the woods, smelling of pines and wet earth, only the sound of men's hurrying feet to guide him. He made himself part of the forest, the way he had in the old days. It wasn't so hard to do. The knack came right back as though he'd been creeping in the trees every night for years. Voices echoed through the night, and Logen pressed himself still and silent up behind a pine trunk, listening. Where's Dirty Nose? There was a pause. Dead, I reckon. Dead? How? They had someone with them. Crow. Some big fucker crow. Logen knew the name, knew the voice too, now that he heard it. A named man who'd fought for Littlebone. You couldn't have called them friends, him and Logen, but they'd known each other. They'd been close together in the line at Carlion, fighting side by side. And now here they were again, with no more than a few strides between them, more than willing to kill each other. Strange, the turns fate can take. Fighting with a man, fighting against him, are only a whisker apart. Far closer together than not fighting at all. Northman, was he? Came Crow's voice. Might been. Whoever it was, he knew his business. Came up real quick. I didn't have time to get a shaft away. Bastard. We ain't letting that pass. We'll camp out here and follow him tomorrow. Might be we'll get him then. This big one. Oh, I will fucking get him. Don't you worry about that none. I'll cut his neck for him, the bastard. Good for you. Till then, you can keep an eye open for him while the rest of us catch some sleep. Might be the Angar'll keep you awake this time, eh? Aye, Chief. Right you are. Logen sat and watched, catching glimpses through the trees as 4 of them spread out their blankets and rolled up to sleep. The 5th took his place, back to the others, and looked out the way they'd come, sitting guard. Logen waited, and he heard one begin to snore. Some rain started up, and it tapped and trickled on the branches of the pines. After a while it spattered into his hair, into his clothes, ran down his face and fell to the wet earth. Drip, drip, drip. Logen sat, still and silent as a stone. It can be a fearsome weapon, patience, one that few men ever learn to use. A hard thing, to keep your mind on killing once you're out of danger and your blood's cooled off. But Logen had always had the trick of it, so he sat, and let the slow time sneak by, and thought about long ago, until the moon was high, and there was pale light washing down between the trees, with the tickling rain. Pale light enough for him to see his tasks by. He uncurled his legs and started moving, working his way between the tree trunks, planting his feet nice and gentle in the brush. The rain was his ally, patter and trickle masking the soft sounds his boots made as he circled round behind the guard. He slid out a knife, wet blade glinting once in the patchy moonlight, and he padded out from the trees and through their camp, between the sleeping men close enough to touch them, close as a brother. The guard sniffed and shifted unhappily, dragging his wet blanket round his shoulders, all beaded up with twinkling raindrops. Logen stopped and waited, looked down at the pale face of one of the sleepers, turned sideways, eyes closed and mouth wide open, breath making faint smoke in the clammy night. The guard was still now, and Logen slipped up close behind him, holding his breath. He reached out with his left hand, fingers working in the misty air, feeling for the moment. He reached out with his right hand, fist clenched tight round the hard grip of his knife. He felt his lips curling back from his gritted teeth. Now was the time, and when the time comes you strike with no backward glances. Logen reached round and clamped his hand tight over the guard's mouth, cut his throat quick and hard, deep enough that he felt the blades scraping on his neck bones. He jerked and struggled for a moment, but Logen held him tight, tight as a lover, and he made no more than a quiet gurgle. Logen felt blood over his hands, hot and sticky. He didn't worry yet about the others. If one of them woke, all they'd see would be the outline of one man in the darkness, and that was all they were expecting. It wasn't long before the guard went limp, and Logen laid him down gently on his side, head flopping. 4 shapes lay there under their wet blankets, helpless. Maybe there'd been a time when Logen would have had to work himself up to a job like this, when he'd have had to think about why it was the right thing to do. But if there had been, it was long gone. Up in the north, the time you spend thinking will be the time you get killed in. All they were now were 4 tasks to get done. He crept up to the first, lifted his bloody knife, overhand, and stabbed him clean in the heart right through his coat, hand pressed over his mouth. He died quieter than he slept. Logen came up on the second one, ready to do the same. His boot clattered into something metal. Water flask, maybe. Whatever it was, it made quite the racket. The sleeping man's eyes worked open. He started to lift himself up. Logen rammed the knife in his gut and dragged at it, slitting his belly open. He made a kind of a wheeze, mouth and eyes wide, clutching at Logen's arm. Eh? The third one sat straight up and staring. Logen tore his hand free and heaved his sword out. Well, The man lifted his arm up, on an instinct, and the dull blade took his hand off at the wrist and chopped deep into his skull, sending black spots of blood showering into the wet air and knocking him down on his back. But that gave the last of them time enough to roll out of his blanket and grab up an axe. Now he stood hunched over, hands spread out, fighting ready like a man who'd had plenty of practice at it. Crow! Logen could hear his breath hissing, see it smoking in the rain. "You should started why me," he hissed. Logen couldn't deny it. He'd been concentrating on getting them all killed, and hadn't paid much mind to the order. Still, it was a bit late to worry now. He shrugged. Start or finish, ain't too much difference. We'll see. Crow weighed his axe in the misty air, shifting around, looking for an opening. Logen stood still and caught his breath, the sword hanging down by his side, the grip cold and wet in his clenched fist. He'd never been much of a one for moving until it was time. "Best tell me your name, while you still got breath in you. I like to know who I've killed. You already know me, Crow." Logen held his other hand up, and he let the fingers spread out, and the moonlight glinted black on his bloody hand, and on the bloody stump of his missing finger. "We were side by side in the line at Carleon. Never thought you'd all forget me so soon. But things don't often turn out the way we expect, eh?" He'd stopped moving now. Had Crow. Logen couldn't see more than a gleam of his eyes in the dark, but he could tell the doubt and the fear in the way he stood. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in the darkness. "Can't be. 9. Minifingers is dead." "That's so?" Logen took a deep breath and pushed it out, slow, into the wet night. "Reckon I must be his ghost." They dug some sort of a hole to squat in, the Union lads, sacks and boxes up on the sides as a rampart. Logen could see the odd face moving over the top, staring off into the trees, the dull light from the guttering fire glinting on an arrowhead or a spear tip. Dug in, watching for another ambush. If they'd been nervy before, they were most likely shitting themselves now. Probably one of them would get scared and shoot him as soon as he made himself known. Damn Union bows had a trigger that went off at a touch once they were drawn. Would have been just about his luck to get killed over nothing in the middle of nowhere, and by his own side too, but he didn't have much of a choice, not unless he wanted to walk up to the front. So he cleared his throat and called out, "Now no one shoot or anything." A string went and a bolt thudded into a tree a couple of strides to his left. Logen hunched down against the wet earth. "No one shoot, I said. Who's out there? Who's out there?" "It's me, Nine Fingers." Silence. The Northman who was on the cart. A long pause and some whispering. "All right, but come out slow and keep your hands where we can see them." "Fair enough." He straightened up and crept out from the trees, hands held high. "Just don't shoot me, eh? That's your end of the deal." He walked across the ground towards the fire, arms spread out, wincing at the thought of getting a bolt in his chest any minute. He recognized the faces of the lads from before, them and the officer who had charge of the supply column. A couple of them followed him with their bows as he stepped slowly over the makeshift parapet and down into the trench. It had been dug along in front of the fire, but not that well, and there was a big puddle in the bottom. "Where the hell did you get to?" demanded the officer angrily. "Tracking them that ambushed us tonight." "Did you catch 'em?" one of the boys asked. "That I did. And it did." Logen nodded at the puddle in the bottom of the hole. "So you needn't sleep in the water tonight. Any of that stew left?" "How many were there?" snapped the officer. Logen poked around the embers of the fire, but the pot was empty. Just his luck, again. 5. You on your own against 5. There were 6 to begin with, but I killed one at the start. He's in the trees over there somewhere. Logen dug a heel of bread out of his pack and rubbed it round the inside of the pot, trying to get a bit of meat grease on there at least. "I waited until they were sleeping, so I only had to fight one of them, face to face. Always been lucky that way, I guess." He didn't feel that lucky. Looking at his hand in the firelight, it was still stained with blood. Dark blood under his fingernails, dried into the lines in his palm. Always been lucky. The officer hardly looked convinced. "How do we know that you aren't one of them? That you aren't spying on us? That they aren't waiting out there now for you to give them a signal when we're vulnerable?" "You've been vulnerable the whole way," snorted Logen. "But it's a fair question. I thought you might ask it." It's a fair question. I thought you might ask it." He pulled the canvas bag out from his belt. "That's why I brought you this. The officer frowned as he reached out for it, shook it open, peered suspiciously inside. He swallowed. Like I said, there were 5. So you got 10 thumbs in there. That satisfy you? The officer looked more sick than satisfied. But he nodded, lips squeezed together, and held the bag back out to him at arm's length. Logen shook his head. Keep it. It's a finger I'm missing. I got all the thumbs I need. The cart lurched to a stop. For the last mile or two, they'd moved at a crawl. Now the road, if you could use the word about a sea of mud, was choked up with floundering men. They squelched their way from one near-solid spot to another, flowing through the thin rain between the press of mired carts and unhappy horses, the stacks of crates and barrels, the ill-pitched tents. Logen watched a group of filth-caked lads straining at a wagon stuck up to its axles in the muck, without much success. It was like seeing an army sink slowly into a bog, a vast shipwreck on land. Logen's traveling companions were down to 7 now, hunched and gaunt, looking mighty tired from sleepless nights and bad weather on the trail. 1 dead, 1 sent back to Ephrith already with an arrow in his leg. Not the best start to their time in the north, but Logen doubted it would get any better from here on. He clambered down off the back of the cart, boots sinking into the well-rutted mud, arched his back and stretched his aching legs out, dragged his pack down. "Luck, then," he said to the lads. None of them spoke. They'd hardly said a word to him since the night of the ambush. Most likely that whole business with the thumbs had got them worried. But if that was the worst they saw while they were up here, they'd have done all right, Logen reckoned. He shrugged and turned away, started floundering through the muck. Just up ahead, the officer from the supply column was being dealt a talking to by a tall, grim-looking man in a red uniform. Seemed like the closest thing they had in all this mess to someone in charge. It took Logen a minute to recognize him. They'd sat together at a feast in very different surroundings, and they'd talked of war. He looked older, leaner, tougher now. He had a hard frown on his face, and a lot of hard gray in his wet hair. But he grinned when he saw Logen standing there, and walked up to him with his hand out. "By the dead," he said in good Northern, "but fate can play some tricks. I know you. Likewise. 9 fingers, wasn't it? That's right. And you're west. From England, that I am. Sorry I can't give you a better welcome, but the army only got up here a day or 2 ago, and as you can see, things aren't quite in order yet." "Not there, idiot," he roared at a driver trying to get his cart between 2 others, the space between them nowhere near wide enough. "Do you have such a thing as summer in this bloody country? You're looking at it. Didn't you see winter? Ha! You've a point there. What brings you up here anyway?" Logen handed West the letter. He hunched over it to shield it from the rain, and read it, frowning. "Signed by Lord Chamberlain Hoff, eh? That a good thing?" West pursed his lips as he handed the letter back. "I suppose that depends. It means you've got some powerful friends, or some powerful enemies. Bit of both, maybe," West grinned. "I find they go together. You've come to fight. That I have. Good. We can always use a man with experience." He watched the recruits clambering down off the carts and gave a long sigh. "We still got far too many here without. You should go up and join the rest of the Northmen." "You've got Northmen with you?" "We have, and more coming over every day. Seems that a lot of them aren't too happy with the way their king has been leading them." "About his deal with the Shanka in particular? Deal with the Shanka?" Logen frowned. He'd never have thought that even Bethod would stoop that low. But it was hardly the first time he'd been disappointed. "He's got flatheads fighting with him." "He certainly does. He's got flatheads, and we've got Northmen. It's a strange world, all right." "That it surely is," said Logen, shaking his head. "How many do you have?" "About 300, I'd say, at last count, though they don't take too well to being counted. Reckon I'll make it 301 then, if you'll have me. They're camped up there on the left wing," and he pointed towards the dark outline of trees against the evening sky. "Right enough." "Who's the chief?" fellow called the Dogman. Logen stared at him for a long moment. "Called the what?" "Dogman. You know him." "You could say that," whispered Logen, a smile spreading right across his face. "You could say that." Dusk was pressing on fast, and night was pressing in fast behind. And they'd just got the long fire burning as Logen walked up. He could see the shapes of the carls taking their places down each side of it, heads and shoulders cut out black against the flames. He could hear their voices and their laughter, loud in the still evening. Now the rain had stopped. It had been a long time since he heard a crowd of men all speaking Northern, and it sounded strange in his ears, even if it was his own tongue. It brought back some ugly memories. Crowds of men shouting at him, shouting for him. Crowds charging into battle, cheering their victories, mourning their dead. He could smell meat cooking from somewhere, a sweet, rich smell that tickled his nose and made his gut grumble. There was a torch set up on a pole by the path, and a bored-looking lad stood underneath it with a spear, frowning at Logen as he walked up. Must have drawn the short straw, to be on guard while the others were eating. And he didn't look too happy about it. "What do you want?" he growled. "You got the Dogman here?" "Aye, what of it? I'll need to speak to him. Will you now?" Another man walked up well past his prime, with a shock of gray hair and a leathery face. "What we got here? New recruit?" grumbled the lad. "Wants to see the chief." The old man squinted at Logen, frowning. "Do I know you, friend?" Logen lifted up his face so the torchlight fell across it. "Better to look a man in the eye and let him see you and show him you feel no fear." That was the way his father had taught him. "I don't know. Do you? Where did you come over from?" "Whiteside's crew, is it?" "No. I've been working alone." "Alone? Well, seems like I recognize." The old boy's eyes opened up wide and his jaw sagged open, and his face went white as cut chalk. "By all the fucking dead," he whispered, taking a stumbling step back. "It's the Bloody Nine." Maybe Logen had been hoping no one would know him, that they'd all have forgotten, that they'd have new things to worry them, and he'd be just a man like any other. But now he saw that look on the old boy's face, that shitting himself look, and it was clear enough how it would be, just the way it used to be. And the worst of it was, now that Logen was recognized, and he saw that fear and that horror and that respect, he wasn't sure that he didn't like seeing it. He'd earned it, hadn't he? After all, facts are facts. He was the Bloody Nine. The lad didn't quite get it yet. "Having a joke on me, are you? You'll be telling me it's Bethod hisself come over next, eh?" But no one laughed, and Logen lifted his hand up and stared through the gap where his middle finger used to be. The lad looked from that stump to the trembling old man and back. "Shit," he croaked. "Where's your chief, boy?" Logen's own voice scared him, flat and dead and cold as the winter. He's. The lad raised a quivering finger to point towards the fires. "Well then, guess I'll sniff him out myself." The two of them edged out of Logen's way. He didn't exactly smile as he passed. More, he drew his lips back to show them his teeth. There was a certain reputation to be lived up to, after all. "No need to worry," he hissed in their faces. "I'm on your side, ain't I?" No one said a word to him as he walked along behind the carls, up towards the head of the fire. A couple of them glanced over their shoulders, but nothing more than any newcomer in a camp might get. They'd no idea who he was yet, but they soon would have. That lad and that old man would be whispering, and the whispers would spread around the fire as whispers do, and everyone would be watching him. He started as a great shadow moved beside him, so big he'd taken it for a tree at first. A huge, big man scratching at his beard, smiling at the fire. Tall Duru. There could be no mistaking the thunderhead even in the half-light. Not a man that size. Made Logen wonder afresh how the hell he'd beaten him in the first place. He felt a strange urge right then, just to put his head down and walk past, off into the night, and never look back. Then he wouldn't have to be the Bloody Nine again. It would just have been a fresh lad and an old man. Swore they saw a ghost one night. He could have gone far away and started new, and been whoever he wanted. But he'd tried that once already, and it had done him no good. The past was always right behind him, breathing on his neck. It was time to turn around and face it. "All right there, big lad." Tool peered at him in the dusk, orange light and black shadow shifting across his big rock of a face, his big rug of a beard. Who hold on? Logen swallowed. He'd no idea, now he thought about it, what any of them might make of seeing him again. They'd been enemies long before they were friends, after all. Each one of them had fought him. Each one of them keen to kill him, and with good reasons too. Then he'd run off south and left them to the Shanka. What if all he got after a year or more apart was a cold look? Then Tull grabbed hold of him and folded him in a crushing hug. "You're alive!" He let go of him long enough to check he had the right man, then hugged him again. I'm alive," wheezed Logen, just enough breath left in him to say it. Seemed he'd get one warm welcome at least. Tull was grinning all over his face. "Come on," and he beckoned Logen after. "The lads are going to shit." He followed Tull, his heart beating in his mouth, up to the head of the fire, where the chief would sit with his closest named men, and there they were, sat around on the ground. Dogman was in the middle, muttering something quiet to Dow. Grim was on the other side, leaning on one elbow, fiddling with the flights on his arrows. It was just like nothing had changed. "Got someone here to see you, Dogman," said Tull, his voice squeaky from keeping the surprise in. "Have you now?" Dogman peered up at Logen, but he was hidden in the shadows behind Tull's great shoulder. "Can't it wait till after we've eaten?" "Do you know, I don't think it can." "Why? Who is it? Who is it?" Tull grabbed Logen's shoulder and shoved him lurching out into the firelight. "It's only Logen fucking Nine Fingers." Logen's boot slid in the mud and he nearly pitched on his arse. Had to wave his arms around all over to keep his balance. The talk around the fire all sputtered out in a moment, and every face was turned towards him. 2 long frozen rows of them, slack in the shifting light. No sound but the sighing wind and the crackling fire. The dogman stared up at him as though he was seeing the dead walk, his mouth hanging wider and wider open with every passing moment. "I thought you was all killed," said Logen, as he got his balance back. "Guess there's such a thing as being too realistic." Dogman got to his feet, slowly. He held out his hand and Logen took hold of it. There was nothing to say, not for men who'd been through as much as the 2 of them had together fighting the Shanka, crossing the mountains, getting through the wars, and after years of it. Dogman pressed his hand and Logen slapped his other hand on top of it, and Dogman slapped his other hand on top of that. They grinned at each other and nodded, and things were back the way they had been. Nothing needed saying. "Grim, good to see you." "Ah," grunted Grim, handing him up a mug then looking back to his shafts, just as though Logen had gone for a piss a minute ago and come back a minute later like everyone had expected. Logen had to grin. He'd have hoped for nothing else. That black Dow hiding down there. "I'd have hidden better if I knew you were coming." Dow looked Logen up and down with a grin not entirely welcoming. "If it ain't Nine Fingers hisself. Thought you said he went over a cliff?" he barked at Dogman. "That's what I saw." "Oh, I went over." Logen remembered the wind in his mouth, the rock and the snow turning around him, the crash as the water crushed his breath out. "I went on over and I washed up whole, more or less." Dogman made room for him on the stretched-out hides by the fire, and he sat down, and the others sat near him. Dow was shaking his head. "You always was a lucky bastard when it came to staying alive. I should have known you'd turn up. I thought the Flatheads had got you all sure," said Logen. "How'd you get out of there?" "3 trees got us out," said Dogman. Tull nodded. "Led us out and over the mountains and hunted through the north and all the way down into England, squabbling all the way like a bunch of old women, no doubt." Dogman grinned across at Dow. There was some moaning on the trail. "Where's 3 trees now, then?" Logen was looking forward to having a word with that old boy. "Dead," said Grim. Logen winced. He'd guessed that might be the way since Dogman was in charge. Tull nodded his big head. "Died fighting, leading a charge, into the Shanka. Deed fighting that thing, that feared, bastard fucking thing." And Dow hawked some spit into the mud. "What about Foley?" "Dead and old," barked Dow. "He went into Carleon to warn Bethod that the Shanka were coming over the mountains. Calder had him killed, just for the sport of it. Bastard." And he spat again. He'd always been a great one for spitting, had Dow. "Dead." Logen shook his head. Foley dead, and 3 trees dead? It was a damn shame. But it wasn't so long since he thought the whole lot of them were back in the mud, so 4 still going was quite the bonus in a way. Well, good men both. The best, and died well by the sound of it. As well as men can, anyway. "Aye," said Tull, lifting up a mug. "As well as you can. Ears to the dead. They all drank in silence, and Logen smacked his lips at the taste of beer. Too long away. So, a year gone by, grunted Dow. We done some killing, and we walked a damn long way, and we fought in a bastard of a battle. We lost 2 men, and we got us a new chief. What the hell you been up to, Nine Fingers? Well, that there is some kind of a tale. Logen wondered what kind exactly, and found he wasn't sure. I thought the Shanka got you all, since life's taught me to expect the worst, so I went south, and I fell in with this wizard. I went a sort of journey with him, across the sea and far away to find some kind of a thing, which when we got there weren't there. It all sounded more than a bit mad now he said it. What kind of a thing? Asked Tull, his face all screwed up with puzzlement. Do you know what? Logen sucked at his teeth, tasting of drink. I can't say that I really know. They all looked at each other as if they never heard such a damn fool's story, and Logen had to admit they probably hadn't. Still, it hardly matters now. Turns out life ain't quite the bastard I took it for. And he gave Toole a friendly clap on the back. The Dogman puffed out his cheeks. Well, we're glad you're back anyway. Guess you'll be taking your place again now, eh? My place? You'll be taking over, no? I mean to say, you were chief. Used to be, maybe. But I've no plans to go back to it. Seems as if these lads are happy enough with things the way they are. But you know a sight more than me about leading men. I don't know that's a fact. Me being in charge never worked out too well for anyone. Now did it? Not for us. Not for those who fought with us. Not for them we fought against. Logen hunched his shoulders at the memories. I'll put my word in, if you want it, but I'd sooner follow you. I did my time, and it wasn't a good one. Dogman looked like he'd been hoping for a different outcome. Well, if you're sure, I'm sure. And Logen slapped him on the shoulder. Not easy, is it, being chief? No, grumbled Dogman. It bloody ain't, Besides, I reckon a lot of these lads have been on the other side of an argument with me before. And they're not altogether pleased to see me. Logen looked down the fire at the hard faces, heard the mutterings with his name in them, too quiet to tell the matter for sure, but he could guess that it wasn't complimentary. They'll be glad enough to have you alongside 'em when the fighting starts, don't worry about that. Maybe. Seemed an awful shame that he'd have to set to killing before folk would give him so much as a nod. Sharp looks came at him from out the dark, flicking away when he looked back. There was only one man, more or less, who met his eye. A big lad with long hair, halfway down the fire. Who's that? Asked Logen. Who's what? That lad down there staring at me. That there is Shivers. Dogman sucked at his pointed teeth. He's got a lot of bones, Shivers. Fought with us a few times now, and he does it damn well. First of all, I'll tell you he's a good man and we owe him. Then I ought to mention that he's Rattleneck's son. Logen felt a wave of sickness. He's what? His other son. The boy? Long time ago now, all that. Boys grow up. A long time ago, maybe. But nothing was forgotten. Logen could see that straight away. Nothing was ever forgotten. Up here in the north. And he should have known better than to think it might be. I should say something to him. If we have to fight together, I should say something. Dogman winced. Might be better that you don't. Some wounds are best not picked at. Eat and talk to him in the morning. Everything sounds fairer in the daylight. That or you can decide against it. Grunted Grim. Logen stood up. You're right, most likely, but it's better to do it than to live with the fear of it. Dogman nodded into the fire. You've been missed, Logen, and that's a fact. You too, Dogman, you too. He walked down through the darkness, smelly with smoke and meat and men, along behind the Carls sitting at the fire. He felt them hunching their shoulders, muttering as he passed. He knew what they were thinking. The bloody 9 right behind me, and there's no worse man in the world to have your back to. He could see Shivers watching him all the way, one eye cold through his long hair, lips pressed together in a hard line. He had a knife out for eating, but just as good for stabbing a man. Logen watched the firelight gleaming on its edge as he squatted down beside him. So you're the bloody 9, Logen grimaced. Aye, I reckon. Shivers nodded, still staring at him. This is what the bloody 9 looks like. Hope you're not disappointed. Oh no, not me. Good to have a face on you after all this time. Logen looked down at the ground, trying to think of some way to come at it. Some way to move his hands, or set his face some words that might start to make the tiniest part of it right. Those were hard times back then, he ended up saying. Harder now. Logen chewed at his lip. Well, maybe not. Times are always hard, I reckon, said Shivers between gritted teeth. That ain't an excuse for doing a runny shit. You're right. There ain't any excuses for what I did. I'm not proud of it. Don't know what else I can say, except I hope you can put it out of the way and we can fight side by side. I'll be honest with you, said Shivers, and his voice was strangled sounding, like he was trying not to shout, or trying not to cry, or both at once maybe. It's a hard thing to just put behind me. You killed my brother when you'd promised him mercy, and you cut his arms and legs off, and you nailed his head on Bethod's standard. His knuckles were trembling white round the grip of his knife, and Logen saw that it was taking all he had not to stab him in the face, and he didn't blame him. He didn't blame him one bit. My father never was the same after that. He'd nothing in him anymore. I spent a lot of years dreaming of killing you, Bloody Nine. Logen nodded, slowly. Well, you'll never be alone with that dream. He caught other cold looks from across the flames now. Frowns in the shadows, grim faces in the flickering light. Men he didn't even know, afraid to their bones, or nursing scores against him. A whole lot of fear and a whole lot of scores. He could count on the fingers of one hand the folk who were pleased to see him alive, even missing a finger. And this was supposed to be his side of the fight. Dogman had been right. Some wounds are best not picked at. Logen got up, his shoulders prickling, and walked back to the head of the fire, where the talk came easier. He'd no doubt Shivers wanted to kill him just as much as he ever had, but that was no surprise. You have to be realistic. No words could ever make right the things he'd done. Chapter 9. Bad Debts. Superior Glokta. Though I believe that we have never been formally introduced, I have heard your name mentioned often these past few weeks. Without causing offense, I hope. It seems as if every room I enter you have recently left, or are due soon to arrive in, and every negotiation I undertake is made more complicated by your involvement. Although our employers are very much opposed in this business, there is no reason why we should not behave like civilized men. It may be that you and I can hammer out between us an understanding that will leave us both with less work and more progress. I will be waiting for you at the slaughter yard near the Four Corners tomorrow morning from 6. My apologies for such a noisy choice of spot, but I feel our conversation would be better kept private. I dare say that neither one of us is to be put off by a little order underfoot. Harlan Morrow, Secretary to High Justice Morovia. Being kind, the place stank. It would seem that a few hundred live pigs do not smell so sweet as one would expect. The floor of the shadowy warehouse was slick with their stinking slurry, the thick air full of their desperate noise. They honked and squealed, grunted and jostled each other in their writhing pens, sensing perhaps that the slaughterman's knife was not so very far away. But, as Morrow had observed, Glokta was not one to be put off by the noise, or the knives, or, for that matter, an unpleasant odor. I spend my days wading through the metaphorical filth. After all, why not the real thing? The slippery footing was more of a problem. He hobbled with tiny steps, his leg burning. Imagine arriving at my meeting caked in pig dung. That would hardly project the right image of fearsome ruthlessness, would it? He saw Morrow now leaning on one of the pens, just like a farmer admiring his prize-winning herd. Glokta limped up beside him, boots squelching, wincing and breathing hard, sweat trickling down his back. Well, Morrow, you know just how to make a girl feel special. I'll give you that. Morovia's secretary grinned up at him, a small man with a round face and eyeglasses. Superior Glokta, may I first say that I have nothing but the highest respect for your achievements in Gurkul, your methods in negotiation, and I did not come here to exchange pleasantries, Morrow. If that's all your business, I can think of sweeter-smelling venues, and sweeter companions too, I do not doubt. To business, then. These are trying times. I'm with you there. Change, uncertainty, unease amongst the peasantry. A little more than unease, I would say, wouldn't you? Rebellion, then. Let us hope that the closed council's trust in Colonel Luther will be justified, and he will stop the rebels outside the city. I wouldn't trust his corpse to stop an arrow, but I suppose the closed council have their reasons. They always do. Though, of course, they do not always agree with each other. They never agree about anything. It's practically a rule of the damn institution, but it is those that serve them, and Morrow peered significantly over the rims of his eyeglasses, that carry the burden for their lack of accord. I feel that we, in particular, have been stepping on each other's toes rather too much for either of our comfort. Sneered Glokta, working his numb toes inside his boot. I do hope your feet aren't too bruised. I could never live with myself if I caused you to limp. Might you have a solution in mind? You could say that. He smiled down at the pigs, watching them squirm and grunt and clamber over one another. We had hogs on the farm, where I grew up. Mercy, anything but the life story. It was my responsibility to feed them. Rising in the morning so early it was still dark, breath smoking in the cold. Oh, he paints a vivid picture. Young Master Morrow, up to his knees in filth, watching his pigs gorge themselves, and dreaming of escape. A brave new life in the glittering city. Morrow grinned up at him, dim light twinkling on the lenses of his spectacles. You know, these things will eat anything, even cripples. Ah, so that's it. It was then that Glokta became aware of a man moving furtively towards them from the far end of the shed, a burly-looking man in a ragged coat, keeping to the shadows. He had his arm pressed tightly by his side, hand tucked up in his sleeve, just as if he were hiding a knife up there and not doing it very well. Better just to walk up with a smile on your face and the knife in plain view. There are 100 reasons to carry a blade in a slaughterhouse, but there can only ever be one reason to try and hide one. He glanced over his shoulder, wincing as his neck clicked. Another man, much like the first, was creeping up from that direction. Glokta raised his eyebrows. So I'm to be slaughtered in the slaughterhouse, eh, Morrow? Butchered at the butcher's. Sandan Glokta, breaker of hearts, winner of the contest, hero of the Gurkish war, shat out the arses of a dozen different pigs. He snorted with laughter, and had to wipe some snot off his top lip. I'm so glad you enjoy the irony, muttered Morrow, looking slightly put out. Oh, I do. Fed to the swine. So obvious I can honestly say it's not what I expected. He gave a long sigh, but not expected and not planned for are two quite different things. The bowstring made no sound over the clamor of the hogs. The thug seemed at first to slip, to drop his shining knife and fall on his side for no reason. Then Glokta saw the bolt poking from his side. Not too great a surprise, of course, and yet it always seems like magic. The hired man at the other end of the warehouse took a shocked step back, never seeing practical Vitari slip silently over the rail of the empty pen behind him. There was a flash of metal in the darkness as she slashed the tendons at the back of his knee and brought him down. His cry quickly shut off as she pulled her chain tight round his neck. Severa dropped down easily from the rafters off to Glokta's left and squelched into the muck. He sauntered over, flatbow across his shoulder, kicked the fallen knife off into the darkness and looked down at the man he had shot. I owe 5 marks, he called to Frost. Missed his heart, damn it. Liver, maybe? Lither, grunted the albino, emerging from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse. The man struggled up to his knees, clutching at the shaft through his side, twisted face half-crusted with filth. Frost lifted his stick as he passed and dealt him a crunching blow on the back of the head, putting a sharp end to his cries and knocking him face down in the muck. Vitari, meanwhile, had wrestled her man onto the floor and was kneeling on his back, dragging at the chain round his neck. His struggling grew weaker, and stopped. A little more dead meat on the floor of the slaughterhouse. Glokta looked back to Morrow. How quickly things can change, eh, Harlan? 1 minute, everyone wants to know you. The next, he tapped sadly at his useless foot with the filthy toe of his cane. You're fucked. It's a tough lesson. I should know. Morovia's secretary backed away, tongue darting over his lips, one hand held out in front of him. Now hold on. Why? Glokta pushed out his bottom lip. Do you really think we can grow to love each other again after all this? Perhaps we can come to some? I'm not upset that you tried to kill me, but to make such a pathetic effort at it, we're professionals, Morrow. It's an insult that you thought this might work. I'm hurt, muttered Severard. Wounded, sang Vitari, chain jingling in the darkness. Deathly offended, grunted Frost, herding Morrow back towards the pen. You should have stuck to licking Hoff's big drunk ass. Or maybe you should have stayed on the farm with your pigs. Tough work, perhaps, in the early morning and so on. But it's a living. Just wait. Just work. Severad grabbed Morrow's shoulder from behind, stabbed him through the side of his neck, and chopped his throat out as calmly as if he was gutting a fish. Blood showered over Glokta's boots, and he stumbled back, wincing as pain shot up his ruined leg. "Shit!" he hissed through his gums, nearly stumbling and falling on his arse in the filth, only managing to stay upright by clinging desperately to the fence beside him. "Couldn't you just have strangled him?" Severad shrugged. "Same result, isn't it?" Morrow slid to his knees, eyeglasses skewed across his face, one hand clutching at his cut neck while blood bubbled out into his shirt collar. Glokta watched the clerk tip onto his back, one leg kicking at the floor, his scraping heel leaving long streaks in the stinking muck. Alas for the pigs on the farm. They will never now see young Master Morrow coming back over the hill, returned from his brave life in the glittering city. His breath smoking in the cold, cold morning. The secretary's convulsions grew gentler, and he lay still. Glokta clung to the rail for a moment, watching the corpse. When was it exactly that I became this? By small degrees, I suppose. One act presses hard upon another, on a path we have no choice but to follow, and each time there are reasons. We do what we must. We do what we are told. We do what is easiest. What else can we do but solve one sordid problem at a time? Then one day we look up and find that we are this. He looked at the blood gleaming on his boot, wrinkled his nose, and wiped it off on Morrow's trouser leg. Ah, well, I would love to spend more time on philosophy, but I have officials to bribe, and noblemen to blackmail, and votes to rig, and secretaries to murder, and lovers to threaten. So many knives to juggle. And as one clatters to the filthy floor, another must go up, blade spinning razor sharp above our heads. It never gets any easier. Our magical friends are back in town. Severad lifted his mask and scratched behind it. The Magi! The first of the bastards, no less, and his bold company of heroes. Him, and his slinking apprentice, and that woman. The navigator, too. Keep an eye on them, and see if there's a piglet we can separate from the herd. It's high time we knew what they were about. Do you still have your charming house by the water, of course? Good. Perhaps for once we can get ahead of the game, and when His Eminence demands answers we can have them to hand, and I can finally earn a pat on the head from my master. What shall we do with these? Asked Vitari, jerking her spiky head towards the corpses. Glokta sighed. The hogs will eat anything, apparently. The city was growing dark, as Glokta dragged his ruined leg through the emptying streets, and up towards the Agrient. The shopkeepers were closing their doors. The householders were lighting their lamps, candlelight spilling out into the dusky alleyways through chinks around the shutters. Happy families settling down to happy dinners, no doubt. Loving fathers with their lovely wives, their adorable children, their full and meaningful lives. My heartfelt congratulations. He pressed his remaining teeth into his sore gums with the effort of maintaining his pace, sweat starting to dampen his shirt, his leg burning more and more with every lurching step. But I'm not stopping for this useless lump of dead meat. The pain crept up from ankle to knee, from knee to hip, from hip all the way up his twisted spine and into his skull. All this effort just to kill a mid-level administrator, who worked no more than a few buildings away from the House of Questions in any case. It's a damn waste of my time, is what it is. It's a damn superior Glokta. A man had stepped up, respectfully, his face in shadow. Glokta squinted at him. It was well done. There was no denying it. He was not even aware of the other man until the bag was over his head, and one of his arms was twisted behind his back, pushing him helplessly forward. He stumbled, fumbled his cane, and heard it clatter to the cobbles. A searing spasm shot through his back as he tried unsuccessfully to drag his arm free, and he was forced to hang limp, gasping with pain inside the bag. In a moment they had his wrists tied, and he felt a powerful hand shoved under each of his armpits. He was marched away with great speed, one man on each side, his feet barely scraping on the cobbles as they went. The fastest I've walked in a good long while, anyway. Their grip was not rough, but it was irresistible. Professionals. An altogether better class of thug than Morrow stretched to. Whoever ordered this is no fool. So who did order it? Salt himself or one of Salt's enemies? One of his rivals in the race for the throne? High Justice Morovia? Lord Brock? Anyone on the entire Open Council? Or could it be the Gurkish? They have never been my closest friends, The banking house of Valent and Balk, perhaps chosen finally to call in their debt. Might I have seriously misjudged young Colonel Luther even? Or could it simply be Superior Goyle, no longer keen to share his job with the cripple? It was quite the list, now that he was forced to consider it. He heard the footfalls slapping around him, narrow alleys. He had no idea how far they had come. His breath echoed in the bag, rasping, throaty. The heart thumps, the skin prickles with cold sweat. Excited. Scared even. What might they want with me? People are not snatched from the street in order to be given promotions or confections or tender kisses. More's the pity. I know why people are snatched from the street. Few better. Down a set of steps, the toes of his boots scuffing helplessly against the treads. The sound of a heavy door being heaved shut. Footsteps echoing in a tiled corridor. Another door closing. He felt himself dumped unceremoniously in a chair. And now, no doubt, for better or worse, we shall find out the bag was snatched suddenly from his head, and Glokta blinked as harsh light stabbed at his eyes. A white room too bright for comfort. A type of room with which I am sadly familiar, and yet it looks so much uglier from this side of the table. Someone was sitting opposite, or the blurry outline of a someone. He closed one eye and peered through the other as his vision adjusted. "Well," he murmured, "what a surprise. A pleasant one, I hope. I suppose we'll see." Carlotte Daniter had changed, and it would seem that exile has not entirely disagreed with her. Her hair had grown back, not all the way, perhaps, but more than far enough to manage a fetching style. The bruises round her throat had faded. There were only the very faintest of marks where her cheek had been covered in scabs. She had swapped Traitor's sackcloth for the travelling clothes of a lady of means, and looked extremely well in them. Jewels twinkled on her fingers and around her neck. She seemed every bit as rich and sleek as when they first met. That, and she was smiling. The smile of the player who holds all the cards. Why is it that I cannot learn, never do a good turn, especially not for a woman? A small pair of scissors lay on the table before her, within easy reach, of the type that rich women use to trim their nails, but just as good for trimming the skin from the soles of a man's feet, for trimming his nostrils wider, for trimming his ears off. Strip by slow strip, Glokta found it decidedly difficult to move his eyes away from those polished little blades, shining in the bright lamplight. "I thought I told you never to come back," he said, but his voice lacked its customary authority. "You did. But then? I thought, why ever not? I have assets in the city that I was not willing to relinquish, and some business opportunities that I am keen to take advantage of." She took up the scissors, trimmed the thinnest scrap from the corner of one already perfectly shaped thumbnail, and frowned at the results. "And it's hardly as though you'll be telling anyone I'm here now, is it?" "My concerns for your safety are all laid to rest," grunted Glokta. "My concerns for my own, alas, grow with every moment. A man is never so crippled, after all, that he could not be more so. Did you really need to go to all this trouble just to share your travel arrangements?" Her smile grew somewhat broader, if anything. "I hope my men didn't hurt you. I did ask them to be gentle, at least for the time being. A gentle kidnapping is still a kidnapping, though, don't you find? Kidnapping is such an ugly word. Why don't we think of it as an invitation difficult to resist? At least I let you keep your clothes, no? That particular favor is a mercy to us both, believe me. An invitation to what, might I ask, beyond the painful manhandling and a brief conversation? I'm hurt that you need more. But there was something else, since you mention it." She pared away another sliver of nail with her scissors, and her eyes rolled up to his. "A little debt left over, from Dagoska. I fear that I will not sleep easily until it is repaid. A few weeks, in a black cell and a choking to the point of death. What form of repayment might that earn me?" "Please, then," hissed Glokta through his gums, his eyelid flickering as he watched those blades snip, snip, snip. "I can scarcely stand the suspense. The Gurkish are coming." He paused for a moment, wrong-footed. "Coming here? Yes, to Midderland, to Adua, to you. They have built a fleet in secret, They began building it after the last war, and now it is complete. Ships to rival anything the Union has." She tossed her scissors down on the table and gave a long sigh. "Or so I hear. The Gurkish fleet, just as my midnight visitor Yulwei told me. Rumors and ghosts, perhaps. But rumors are not always lies. When will they arrive? I really couldn't say. The mounting of such an expedition is a colossal work of organization. But then the Gurkish have always been so very much better organized than us. That's what makes doing business with them such a pleasure. My own dealings with them have been less than delightful. But still, in what numbers will they come? A very great number, I imagine." Glokta snorted. "Forgive me if I regard the words of a proven traitor with a certain skepticism, especially as you are rather thin on the details. Have it your way. You're here to be warned, not convinced. I owe you that much, I think, for giving me my life. How wonderfully old-fashioned of you. And that is all." She spread her hands. "Can a lady not trim her nails without giving offense? Could you not simply have written?" snapped Glokta, "and spared me the chafing on my underarms? Oh, come now. You never struck me as a man to bridle at a little chafing. Besides, it has given us the chance to renew a thoroughly enjoyable friendship, and you have to allow me my little moment of triumph. After what you put me through, I suppose that I can. I've had less charming threats, and at least she has better taste than to meet in a pigsty. I can simply walk away then. Did anyone pick up a cane? No one spoke." Ida gave a happy smile, showing Glokta her perfect white teeth. "You can crawl away then. How does that sound? Better than floating to the top of the canal after a few days on the bottom, bloated up like a great pale slug and smelling like all the graves in the city. As good as I'll get, I suppose. I do wonder, though. What is to stop me having my practicals follow the scent of expensive perfume after we are done here and finish what they started? It is so very like you to say such a thing." She sighed. "I should inform you that an old and trustworthy business acquaintance of mine has a sealed letter in his possession. In the event of my death, it will be sent to the Archlector, laying out to him the exact nature of my sentence in Dagoska." Glokta sucked sourly at his gums. "Just what I need. Another knife to juggle. And what will occur if, entirely independently from my actions, you succumb to the rot, or a house falls on you, or you choke on a slice of bread?" She opened her eyes very wide, as though the thought had only just occurred. "In any of those cases, I suppose the letter would be sent anyway, despite your innocence." She gave a helpless laugh. "The world is nothing like as fair a place as it should be, in my opinion, and I dare say that the natives of Dagoska, the enslaved mercenaries, and the butchered Union soldiers, who you made fight for your lost cause, would concur." She smiled as sweetly as if they were discussing gardening. "Things would probably have been far simpler for you if you'd had me strangled after all. You read my mind. But it is far too late now. I did a good thing, and so of course there is a price to be paid. So tell me, before we part ways again, for what, we can both only hope, will be the last time are you involved with this business of the vote?" Glokta felt his eye twitch. "My duties would seem to touch upon it. Indeed, it occupies my every waking hour." Carla Dan Ida leaned forward to a conspiratorial distance, her elbows on the table, her chin in her hands. "Who will be the next king of the Union, do you suppose? Will it be Brock, Isher? Will it be someone else? A little early to say. I'm working on it. Off you hobble then." She pushed out her bottom lip. "And it's probably better if you don't mention our meeting to His Eminence." She nodded, and Glokta felt the bag forced back over his face. Chapter 10. A ragged multitude. Jezal's command post, if you could use the phrase in relation to a man as utterly confused and clueless as he felt, was at the crest of a long rise. It offered a splendid view of the shallow valley below. At least it would have been a splendid view in happier times. As things stood, it had to be admitted, the spectacle was far from pleasant. The main body of the rebels entirely covered several large fields further down the valley, and a dark and grubby and threatening infestation they seemed, glinting in places with bright steel. Farming implements and tradesmen's tools perhaps, but sharp ones. Even at this distance, there was disturbing evidence of organization. Straight, regular gaps through the men for the quick movement of messengers and supplies. It was plain, even to Jezal's unpracticed eye, that this was as much an army as a mob, and that someone down there knew his business. A great deal better than he did, most likely. Smaller, less organized groups of rebels were scattered far and wide across the landscape, each one a considerable body in its own right. Men sent foraging for food and water, picking the country clean. That crawling black mass on the green fields reminded Jezal of a horde of black ants crawling over a pile of discarded apple peelings. He had not the slightest idea how many of them there were, but it looked at this distance as though 40,000 might have been a considerable underestimate. Down in the village in the bottom of the valley, behind the main mass of rebels, fires were burning. Bonfires or buildings, it was hard to say. But Jezal rather feared the latter. 3 tall columns of dark smoke rose up and drifted apart high above, giving to the air a faint and worrying tang of fire. It was a commander's place to set a tone of fearlessness, which his men would not be able to help but follow. Jezal knew that, of course, and yet, looking down that long sloping field, he could not help but reflect on the very great number of men at the other end. So ominously purposeful, he could not stop his eyes from darting back towards their own lines, so thin, meager, and uncertain seeming. He could not avoid wincing and tugging uncomfortably at his collar. The damn thing still felt far too tight. "How do you wish the regiments deployed, sir?" asked his adjutant, Major Ocker, with a look which somehow managed to be both condescending and sycophantic all at once. Deployed? Jezal racked his brains for something vaguely appropriate, let alone correct, to say. He had discovered early in his military career that if one has an effective and experienced officer above, coupled with effective and experienced soldiers below, one need do, and know, nothing. This strategy had stood him in fine stead for several comfortable peacetime years, but its one shortcoming was now starkly laid bare. If by some miracle one rises to complete command, the system collapses entirely. "Deployed," he growled, furrowing his brow and trying to give the impression he was surveying the ground, though he had only a hazy idea what that even meant. "Infantry in double line," he ventured, remembering a fragment of some story Column West had once told him. "Behind this hedgerow here," and he slashed his baton portentously across the landscape. The use of a baton, at least, he was expert in, having practiced extensively before the mirror. "In front of the hedgerow," the colonel means to say, of course, threw in Bayaz smoothly. "Infantry deployed in double line to either side of that milestone. The light cavalry in the trees there, heavy cavalry in a wedge on the far flank, where they can use the open field to their advantage." He displayed an uncanny familiarity with military parlance. "Flat bows in a single line behind the hedgerow where they will at first be hidden from the enemy, and can give them plunging fire from the high ground." He winked at Jezal. "An excellent strategy, Colonel, if I may say." "Of course," sneered Ocker, turning away to give the orders. Jezal gripped tight to his baton behind his back, rubbing nervously at his jaw with the other hand. Evidently there was a lot more to command than simply being called Seer by everyone. He would really have to read some books when he got back to Adua. If he got back, 3 small dots had detached themselves from the crawling mass of humanity down in the valley and started moving up the rise toward them. Shading his eyes with his hand, Jezal could just see a shred of white moving in the air above them. A flag of parley. He felt Bayaz's decidedly uncomforting hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, my boy. We are well prepared for violence, but I feel confident it will not come to that." He grinned down at the vast mass of men below. Very confident. Jezal ardently wished he could have said the same. For a famous demagogue, traitor, and inciter of riots, there was nothing in the least remarkable about the man known as the Tanner. He sat calmly in his folding chair at the table in Jezal's tent, an ordinary face under a mop of curly hair, a man of medium size in a coat of unexceptional style and color, a grin on his face that implied he knew very well that he held the upper hand. "They call me the Tanner," he said, "and I have been nominated to speak for the alliance of the oppressed and the exploited and the put upon down in the valley. These are 2 of my partners in this righteous and entirely patriotic venture. My 2 generals, one might say. Goodman Hood," and he nodded sideways at a burly man with a shovel beard, a ruddy complexion, and a seething frown, "and Cotter Holst," and he jerked his head the other way towards a weaselly type with a long scar on his cheek and a lazy eye. "Honored," said Jezal warily, though they looked more like brigands than generals as far as he was concerned. "I am Colonel Luther, I know. I saw you in the contest. Fine swordplay, my friend. Very fine. Oh, well, Jezal was caught off guard. Thank you. This is my adjutant, Major Aker, and this is Bayaz, the first of the Magi. Goodman Hood snorted his disbelief, but the tanner only stroked thoughtfully at his lip. Good, and you have come to fight or negotiate? We have come for either one. Jezal embarked on his statement. The closed council, while condemning the method of your demonstration, concede that you may have legitimate demands. Hood made a rumbling snort. What choice have they got, the bastards? Jezal pressed on. Well, they have instructed me to offer you these concessions. He held up the scroll that Hoff had prepared for him. A huge thing with elaborately carved handles and a seal the size of a saucer. But I must caution you, doing his very best to sound confident, should you refuse, we are quite ready to fight, and that my men are the best trained, best armed, best prepared in the king's service. Each one of them is worth 20 of your rabble. The burly farmer gave a threatening chuckle. Lord Finster thought the same, and our rabble kicked his arse all the way from one end of his estates to the other. He would have got himself hung for his trouble if he'd had a slower horse. How fast is your horse, Colonel? The tanner touched him gently on the shoulder. Peace now, my fiery friend. We came to get terms. If we can get terms, we can accept. Why not show us what you have there, Colonel, and we'll see if there is any need for threats. Jezal held out the weighty document, and Hood snatched it angrily from his hand, tore it open, and began to read, the thick paper crackling as it unrolled. The more he read, the grimmer grew his frown. An insult, he snapped when he was done, giving Jezal a brooding stare. Lighter taxes and some shit about the use of common land, and that much they'll most likely never honor. He tossed the scroll sideways to the tanner, and Jezal swallowed. He had not the leanest understanding of the concessions or their possible shortcomings, of course, but Hood's response hardly seemed to promise an early agreement. The tanner's eyes moved lazily over the parchment. Different-colored eyes, Jezal noticed, one blue, one green. When he got to the bottom, he laid the document down and gave a theatrical sigh. These terms will do. They will. Jezal's eyes opened wide with surprise, but nowhere near as far as Goodman Hood's. But these are worse than the last terms we were offered, shouted the farmer. Before we sent Finster's men running, you said then we could accept nothing but land for every man. The tanner screwed his face up. That was then, muttered Hood, gaping with disbelief. What happened to honest wages for honest work? What happened to shares in the profit? What happened to equal rights no matter the cost? You stood there and you promised me. He shoved his hand towards the valley. You promised all of them. What's changed, except that Adua is within our grasp? We can take all we want. We can— I say these terms will do, snarled the tanner with a sudden fury. Unless you care to fight the king's men on your own. They follow me, Hood, not you, in case you hadn't noticed. But you promised us freedom for every man. I trusted you. The farmer's face hung slack with horror. We all trusted you. Jezal had never seen a man look so utterly indifferent as the tanner did now. I suppose I must have that kind of face that people trust, he droned, and his friend Holst shrugged and stared at his fingernails. Damn you, then. Damn you all. And Hood turned and shoved angrily out through the tent flap. Jezal was aware of Bayaz leaning sideways to whisper to Major Aker. Have that man arrested before he leaves the lines? Arrested, my lord, but under a flag of parley. Arrested, placed in irons, and conducted to the House of Questions. A shred of white cloth can be no hiding place from the king's justice. I believe Superior Goyle is handling the investigations. Heir, of course. Aker rose to follow the goodman out of the tent, and Jezal smiled nervously. There was no doubt that the tanner had heard the exchange, but he grinned on as though the future of his erstwhile companion was no longer any of his concern. I must apologize for my associate. In a matter like this, you can't please everyone. He gave a flamboyant wave of his hand. But don't worry. I'll give the little people a big speech, and tell them we have all we fought for, and they'll soon be off back to their homes with no real harm done. Some few will be determined to make trouble, perhaps, but I'm sure you can round them up without much effort. Colonel Luther? Well, mumbled Jezal, left without the slightest idea of what was going on. I suppose that excellent. The tanner sprang to his feet. I fear I must now take my leave. All kinds of errands to be about. Never any peace? Colonel Luther. Never the slightest peace. He exchanged a long glance with Bayaz, then ducked out into the daylight and was gone. If anyone should ask, murmured the first of the Magi in Jezal's ear, I would tell them that it was a testing negotiation against sharp and determined opponents, but that you held your nerve, reminded them of their duty to king and country, implored them to return to their fields, and so forth. But Jezal felt like he wanted to cry. He was so baffled. Hugely baffled and hugely relieved at once. But if anyone should ask. There was an edge to Bayaz's voice that implied the episode was now finished with. Chapter 11. Beloved of the moon, the Dogman stood, squinting into the sun, and watched the Union lads all shuffling past the other way. There's a certain look the beaten get after a fight. Slow-moving, hunched up, mud-spattered, mightily interested in the ground. Dogman had seen that look before often enough. He'd had it himself mourn once. Sorrowful they'd lost. Shamed they'd been beaten. Guilty to have given up without getting a wound. Dogman knew how that felt, an gnawing feeling it could be. But guilt was a sight less painful than a sword cut, and healed a sight quicker. Some of the hurt weren't so badly off, bandaged or splinted, limping with a stick, or with their arm round a mate's shoulders, enough to get light duty for a few weeks. Others weren't so lucky. Dogman thought he knew one, an officer hardly old enough for a beard, his smooth face all twisted up with white pain and shock, his leg off just above the knee, his clothes and the stretcher, and the two men carrying him, all specked and spattered with dark blood. He was the one who'd sat on the gate when Dogman and Three Trees had first come to Ostenholm to join up with the Union, the one who'd looked at him like they were a pair of turds. He didn't sound so very clever now, squealing with every jolt of his stretcher, but it hardly made the Dogman smile. Losing a leg seemed like harsh punishment for a sneering manner. West was down there by the path, talking to an officer with a dirty bandage round his head. Dogman couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could guess the gist. From time to time, one of them would point up towards the hills they'd come from, a steep and nasty-looking pair, wooded mostly, with a few hard faces of bare rock showing. West turned and caught the Dogman's eye, and his face was grim as a gravedigger's. It hardly took a quick mind to see that the war weren't won quite yet. Shit, muttered the Dogman under his breath. He felt that sucking feeling in his gut, that low feeling he used to get whenever he had to scout out a new piece of ground, whenever Three Trees called for weapons, whenever there was nothing for breakfast but cold water. Since he was chief, though, he seemed to have it pretty much all the time. Everything was his problem now. Nothing doing. West shook his head as he walked up. Bethod was waiting for us, and in numbers. He's dug in on those hills, well dug in and well prepared, between us and Carleon. More than likely he was ready for this before he even crossed the border. He always did like to be ready, did Bethod. No way round him. Croy's tried both the roads and had 2 maulings. Now Polders tried the hills head-on and had a worse one. Dogman sighed. No way round. No way that won't give Bethod a nice chance to stick the knife right into us. And Bethod won't be missing no chance like that. It's what he'll be hoping for. The Lord Marshal agrees. He wants you to take your men north. West glared out at the gray whispers of other hills, further off. Kay wants you to look for a weakness. There's no way Bethod can cover the whole range, is there not? Asked Dogman. I guess we'll see. Then he headed off into the trees. The boys were going to love this. He strode up the track, soon came up on where his crew were camped out. They were growing all the time. Might have been 400 now, all counted, and a tough crowd too. Those who'd never much cared for Bethod in the first place, mostly who'd fought against him in the wars, who'd fought against the Dogman as well, for that matter. The woods were choked up with them, sat round fires, cooking, polishing at weapons and working at gear. A couple having a practice at each other with blades. Dogman winced at the sound of steel clashing. There'd be more of that later, and with bloodier results he didn't doubt. Chief! They shouted at him. Dogman! The chief! Hey, hey! They clapped their hands and tapped their weapons on the rocks they sat on. Dogman held up his fist, and gave the odd half-grin and said, Aye, good, and all that. He still didn't have the slightest clue how to act like a chief, if the truth be told, so he just acted like he always had. The band all seemed happy enough, though. He guessed they always did, until they started losing fights and decided they wanted a new chief. He came up on the fire where the pick of his named men were passing the day. No sign of Logen, but the rest of the old crew were sat round it, looking bored. Those that were still alive, leastways. Tull saw him coming. "The Dogman's back," said Grim, trimming at some feathers with a razor. Dow was busy mopping grease out of a pan with a chunk of bread. How'd the Union get on with them hills, then? And he had a sneer to his voice that said he knew the answer already. Make a shit from it, did they? Well, they came out second, if that's what you're asking. Second of two sides is what I call shit. Dogman took a deep breath and let it pass. Bethod's dug in good, watching the roads to Carlion. No one can see an easy way to come at him, or an easy way around him neither. He was good and ready for this, I reckon. I could have bloody told you that, barked Dow, spraying out greasy crumbs. He'll have little bone on one of them hills and white sides on the other. Then he'll have pale as snow and goring further out. Those four won't be giving anyone any chances, but if they decide to, Bethod'll be sat behind with the rest, and his Shanka and his fucking feared, ready to snuff 'em out double time. More'n likely. Tool held his sword up to the light, peered at it, then set to polishing up the blade again. Always liked to have a plan, did Bethod. And what do them that hold our leash have to say? Sneered Dow. What sort of work's the Furious got for his animals? Burr wants us to move north away, through the woods, see if Bethod's left a weak spot up there. Huh, snorted Dow. Bethod ain't in the habit of leaving holes. Not unless he's left one he means for us to fall into. Fall into and break our necks. Well, I guess we'd better be careful where we tread then, eh? More bloody errands. Dogman reckoned he was getting about as sick of Dow's moaning as 3 trees used to be. And just what else would it be, eh? That's what life is. A bunch of errands. If you're worth a shit, you do your best at 'em. What's got up your arse, anyway? This. Dow jerked his head into the trees. Just this. Nothing's changed that much, has it? We might be over the White Flow, and back in the north. But Bethod's dug in good and proper up there, with no way for the Union to get round him that won't leave their arses hanging out. And if they do knock him off them hills, what then? Off then. If they get to Carlion and they get in, and they burn it just as good as Nine Fingers did the last time, so what? Don't mean nothing. Bethod'll keep going, just like he always does, fighting and falling back. And there'll always be more hills to sit on and more tricks to play. Time will come. The Union will have had their fill and they'll piss off south and leave us to it. Then Bethod's going to turn around and what you know? He'll be the one chasing us all the way across the fucking north and back. Winter, summer, and it's more of the same old shit. Here we are, fewer of us than there used to be, but still pissing around in the woods. Feel familiar? It did somewhat, now it was mentioned, but Dogman didn't see what he could do about it. Logen's back now, eh? That'll help. Dow snorted again. Ha! Just when did the Bloody Nine bring anything but death along with him? Steady now, grunted Tull. You owe him, remember? We all do. There's a limit on what a man should owe, I reckon. Dow tossed his pan down by the fire and stood up, wiping his hands on his coat. Where's he been, eh? He left us up in the valleys without a word, didn't he? Left us to the flatheads and pissed off halfway across the world. Who's to say he won't wander off again, if it suits him? Or go over to Bethod, or set to murder over nothing, or the dead know what. Dogman looked at Tull, and Tull looked back, guilty. They'd all seen Logen do some damn dark work when the mood was on him. That was a long time ago, said Tull. Things change. Dow only grinned. No, they don't. Tell yourselves that tale if it makes you sleep easier, but I'll be keeping one eye open, I can tell you that. It's the Bloody Nine we're talking of. Who knows what he'll do next? I've one idea. The Dogman turned round and saw Logen, leaning up against a tree, and he was starting to smile when he saw the look in his eye, a look Dogman remembered from way back, and dragged all kind of ugly memories up after it. That look the dead have, when the life's gone out of 'em, and they care for nothing anymore. You got a thing to say, then you can say it to my face, I reckon. Logen walked up, right up close to Dow, with his head falling on one side, scars all pale on his hanging down face. The Dogman felt the hairs on his arms standing up, cold feeling even though the sun was warm. "Come on, Logen," wheedled Tull, trying to sound like the whole business was all a laugh when it was plain as a slow death. It was no such thing. Dow didn't mean nothing by it. "He's just—" Logen spoke right over him, staring Dow in the face with his corpse's eyes all the long while. "I thought when I gave you the last lesson that you'd never need another. But I guess some folk have short memories." He came in even closer, so close that their faces were almost touching. "Well, you need a learning boy?" Dogman winced, sure as sure they'd set to killing one another, and how the hell he'd stop 'em once they started, he hadn't the faintest clue. A tense moment all round. It seemed to last forever. He wouldn't have taken that from any other man, alive or dead, Black Dow, not even 3 trees. But in the end he just split a yellow grin. "Nah, 1 lesson's all I need." And he turned his head sideways, hawked up and spat onto the ground. Then he backed off. No hurry, that grin still on his face. Like he was saying he'd take a telling this time, maybe, but he might not the next, once he was gone. And no blood spilled, Tull blew out hard like they'd got away with murder. "Right then, north, was it?" "Someone better get the lads ready to move," said Grim, sliding the last arrow into his quiver and following him off through the trees. Logen stood there for a moment, watching him walk. When they'd got away out of sight, he turned round, and he squatted down by the fire, hunched over with his arms resting on his knees and his hands dangling. Thank the dead for that. "I nearly shit myself." Dogman realized he'd been holding on to his breath the whole while, and he let it rush out in a gasp. "I think I might, Eve, just a bit." "Did you have to do that?" "You know I did. Let a man like Dow take liberties, and he won't ever stop." "Then all the rest of these lads will get the idea that the bloody 9 ain't anything like so frightening as they heard, and it'll be a matter of time before someone with a grudge decides to take a blade to me." Dogman shook his head. "That's a hard way of thinking about things. That's the way they are. They haven't changed any. They never do. True, maybe. But they weren't ever going to change if no one gave 'em half a chance. Still, you sure all that's needful? Not for you, maybe. Not for you, maybe. You got that knack that folk like you." Logen scratched at his jaw, looking sadly off into the woods. "Reckon I missed my chance at that about 15 years ago. And I ain't getting another." The woods were warm and familiar. Birds twittered in the branches, not caring a damn for Bethod or the Union, or any the doings of men. Nowhere had ever seemed more peaceful, and Dogman didn't like that one bit. He sniffed at the air, sifting it through his nose over his tongue. He was double careful these days, since that shaft came over and killed Cathal in the battle. Might have been he couldn't saved her, if he'd trusted his own nose a mite more. He wished he had saved her, but wishing don't help any. Dow squatted down in the brush, staring off into the still forest. "What is it, Dogman? What you smell?" "Men, I reckon, but kind of sour somehow. Smells like—" An arrow flitted up out of the trees, clicked into the tree trunk just beside Dogman and stuck there, quivering. "Shit!" Dow slithered down cursing beside him, and they got all tangled up with each other. Dogman nearly got his eye poked out on Dow's axe before he managed to push him off. He shoved his palm out at the men behind to say stop, but they were already scattering for cover, crawling for trees and rocks on their bellies, pulling out weapons and staring into the woods. A voice drifted over from the forest ahead. "You, with Bethod." Whoever it was spoke northern with some strange-sounding accent. Dow and Dogman looked at each other for a minute, then shrugged. "No," Dow roared back. "And if you are, you'd best make ready to meet the dead." A pause. "We're not with that bastard, and never will be." "Good enough," shouted Dogman, putting his head up no more than an inch, his bow full drawn and ready in his hands. "Show yourselves, then." A man stepped out from behind a tree, maybe 6 strides distant. Dogman was that shocked he nearly fumbled the string and let the shaft fly. More men started sliding out of the woods all round. Dozens of them. Their hair was tangled. Their faces were smeared with streaks of brown dirt and blue paint. Their clothes were ragged fur and half-tanned hides, but the heads of their spears, and the points of their arrows, and the blades of their rough-forged swords, all shone bright and clean. "Hillmen," Dogman muttered. "Hillmen we are, and proud of it." A great big voice. echoing out from the woods. A few of them started to shuffle to one side, like they were making way for someone. Dogman blinked. There was a child coming between them. A girl, maybe 10 years old, with dirty bare feet. She had a huge hammer over one shoulder, a thick length of wood astride, long with a scarred lump of iron the size of a brick for a head. Far and away, too big for her to swing. It was giving her some trouble even holding it up. A little boy came next. He had a round shield across his back, much too wide for him, and a great axe he was lugging along in both hands. Another boy was at his shoulder with a spear twice as high as he was, the bright point waving around above his head, gold twinkling under the blade in the strips of sunlight. He kept having to look up to make sure he didn't catch it on a branch. "I'm dreaming," muttered the Dogman. "Aren't I?" Dow frowned. "If you are, it's a strange one." They weren't alone, the 3 children. Some huge bastard was coming up behind. He had a ragged fur around his great wide shoulders, and some big necklace hanging down on his great fat belly. A load of bones. Finger bones, the Dogman saw as he got closer. Men's fingers, mixed up with flat bits of wood, strange signs cut into them. He had a great yellow grin hacked out from his gray-brown beard, but that didn't put the Dogman any more at ease. "Oh shit," groaned Dow. "Let's go back. Back south and enough of this." "Why? You know him?" Dow turned his head and spat. "Crummock I fail, ain't it?" Dogman almost wished it had turned out to be an ambush now rather than a chat. It was a fact that every child knew. Crummock I fail, chief of the hillmen, was about the maddest bastard in the whole damn north. He pushed the spears and the arrows gently out of his way as he came. "No need for that now. Is there, my beauties? We're all friends, or got the same enemies at least, which is far better, do you see? We all have a lot of enemies up in them hills, don't we, though? The moon knows I love a good fight, but coming at them great big rocks, with Bethod and all his arselickers stuck in tight on top? That's a bit too much fight for anyone, eh? Even your new southern friends." He stopped just in front of them, finger bones swinging and rattling. The 3 children stopped behind him, fidgeting with their great huge weapons and frowning up at Dow and the Dogman. "I'm Crummock I fail," he said. "Chief of all the hillmen, or all the ones as are worth a shit." He grinned as though he'd just turned up to a wedding. "Might be in charge of this merry outing." Dogman felt that hollow feeling again, but there was nothing for it. "That'd be me." Crummock raised his brows at him. "Would it now? You're a little fellow to be telling all these big fellows just what to be about, are you not? You must have quite some name on your shoulders, I'm thinking." "I'm the Dogman. This is Black Dow. Some strange sort of a crew you got here," said Dow, frowning at the children. "Oh, it is. And a brave one at that. The lad with my spear, that's my son Scofen. The one with my axe is my son Rond." Crummock frowned at the girl with the hammer. "This lad's name I can't remember." "I'm your daughter," shouted the girl. "What? Did I run out of sons? Sen got too old and you give him his own sword, and Skef's too small to carry nothing yet." Crummock shook his head. "Don't hardly seem right, a bloody woman taking the hammer." The girl threw the hammer down on the ground and booted Crummock in his shin. "You can carry it yourself then, you old bastard." "Ah!" he squawked, laughing and rubbing his leg at once. "Now I remember you, Izern. Your kick-ins brought it all back in a rush. You can take the hammer, so you can. Smallest one gets the biggest load, eh? You want the axe, da?" The smaller lad held the axe up, wobbling. "You want the hammer?" The girl dragged it up out the brush and shouldered her brother out the way. "Nom, my loves. All I need for now is words, and I've plenty of those without your help. You can watch your father work some murder soon, if things run smooth. But there'll be no need for axes or hammers today. We didn't come here to kill." "Why did you come here?" asked Dogman, though he wasn't sure he even wanted the answer. "Right to business, is it? And no time to be friendly." Crummock stretched his neck to the side, his arms over his head, and lifted one foot and shook it around. "I came here because I woke in the night, and I walked out into the darkness, and the moon whispered to me. In the forest, you see, in the trees, and in the voices of the owls in the trees. And you know what the moon said? "That you're mad as fuck," growled Dow. Crummock slapped his huge thigh. "You've a pretty way of talking for an ugly man, Black Dow, but no." The moon said, and he beckoned to the Dogman like he had some secret to share. "You got the bloody 9 down here. What if we do?" Logen came up quiet from behind, left hand resting on his sword. Tool and Grim came with him, frowning at all the painted-face hillmen stood about, and at the 3 dirty children, and at their great fat father most of all. "There he is!" roared Crummock, sticking out one great sausage of a trembling finger. "Take your fist off that blade, bloody 9, before I piss my brakes." He dropped down on his knees in the dirt. "This is him! This is the one!" He shuffled forward through the brush, and he clung to Logen's leg, pressing himself up against it like a dog to his master. Logen stared down at him. "Get off my leg." "That I will!" Crummock jerked away and dropped down on his fat arse in the dirt. Dogman had never seen such a performance. Looked like the rumors about him being cracked were right enough. "Do you know a fine thing, bloody 9? More'n one, as it goes. Here's another, then. I saw you fight Shama Heartless. I saw you split him open like a pigeon for the pot. And I couldn't have done it better, my blessed self. A lovely thing to see." Dogman frowned. He'd been there too, and he didn't remember much lovely about it. "I said then." And Crummock rose up to his knees, and I said since, and he stood up on his feet. "And I said it when I came down from the hills to seek you out." And he lifted up his arm to point at Logen, "that you're a man more beloved of the moon than any other." Dogman looked over at Logen, and Logen shrugged. "Who's to say what the moon likes or doesn't? What of it? What of it? He says. Ha! I could watch him kill the whole world, and a thing of beauty it would be. The what of it is, I have a plan." It flowed up with the cold springs under the mountains, and was carried along in the streams under the stones, and washed up on the shore of the sacred lake right beside me, while I was dipping my toes in the frosty. Logen scratched at his scarred jaw. "We've got work to be about, Crummock. You got something worth saying, you can get to it. Then I will. Bethod hates me and the feeling's mutual, but he hates you more. Because you've stood against him, and you're living proof a man of the North can be his own man, without bending on his knee and tonguing the arse of that golden hat bastard and his 2 fat sons and his witch." He frowned. "Though I could be persuaded to take my tongue to her. Do you follow me so far?" "I'm keeping up," said Logen, but Dogman weren't altogether sure that he was. "Just whistle if you drop behind, and I'll come right back for you. My meaning's this: if Bethod were to get a good chance at catching you all alone, away from your Union friends, you're crawling like ants, sunny weather lovers over down there yonder, then, well, he might give up a lot to take it. He might be coaxed down from his pretty hills for a chance like that, I'm thinking. You're betting that he hates me a lot. What? Do you doubt that a man could hate you that much?" Crummock turned away, spreading his great long arms out wide at Tull and Grim. "But it's not just you, bloody 9. It's all of you, and me as well, and my 3 sons here." The girl threw the hammer down again and planted her hands on her hips, but Crummock blathered on regardless. "I'm thinking your boys join up with my boys, and it might be we'll have 800 spears. We'll head up north, like we're going up into the high places, to get around behind Bethod and play merry mischief with his arse end. I'm thinking that'll get his blood up. I'm thinking he won't be able to pass on a chance to put all of us back in the mud." The Dogman thought it over. Chances were that a lot of Bethod's people were jumpy about now, worried to be fighting on the wrong side of the white flow. Maybe they were hearing the bloody 9 was back, and thinking they'd to wrong side. Bethod would love to put a few heads on sticks for everyone to look at. 9 fingers, and Crummock I fail, Tull Duru, and Black Dow, and maybe even the Dogman too. He'd like that, would Bethod. Show the North there was no future in anything but him. He'd like it a lot. "Supposing we do wander off north?" asked Dogman. "How's Bethod even going to know about it?" Crummock grinned wider than ever. "Oh, he'll know because his witch'll know." "Bloody witch," piped up the lad with the spear, his thin arms trembling as he fought to keep it up straight. "That spell-cooking, painted-face bitch Bethod keeps with him. Or does she keep him with her? There's a question, though. Either way, she's watching. Ain't she, bloody 9? "I know who you mean," said Logen, and not looking happy. "Corrib. A friend o' mine once told me she had the long eye. Dogman didn't have the first clue about all that, but if Logen was taking it to heart, he reckoned he'd better too. The long eye, is it? Crummock grinned. Your friend's got a pretty name for an ugly trick. She sees all manner of goings-on with it. All kind of things it'd be better for us if she didn't. Bethod trusts her eyes before he trusts his own these days, and he'll have her watching for us, and for you in particular. She'll have both her long eyes open for it, that she will. I may be no wizard, and he spun one of the wooden signs around and around on his necklace, but the moon knows I'm no stranger to the business neither. And what if it goes like you say? Rumbled Tull. What happens then? What happens then? Apart from we give Bethod our heads. Oh, I like my head where it is, big lad. We draw him on, north by north, that's what the forest told me. There's a place up in the mountains, a place well loved by the moon, a strong valley, and watched over by the dead of my family, and the dead of my people, and the dead of the mountains, all the way back until when the world was made. Dogman scratched his head. A fortress in the mountains. A strong, high place. A strong, high place. High and strong enough for a few to hold off a many until help were to arrive. We lure him on up into the valley, and your Union friends follow up at a lazy distance, far enough that his witch don't see him coming. She's so busy looking at us. Then, while he's all caught up in trying to snuff us out for good and all, the Southerners creep up behind, and... He slapped his palms together with an echoing crack. We squash him between us, the sheep-fucking bastard. Sheep-fucker, cursed the girl, kicking at the hammer on the ground. They all looked at each other for a moment. Dogman didn't much like the sound of this for a plan. He didn't much like the notion of trusting their lives to the say-so, this crazy hillman. But it sounded like some kind of a chance. Enough that he couldn't just say no, however much he'd have liked to. We got to talk on this. Course you do, my new best friends, course you do. Don't take too long about it, though. Eh? Crummock grinned wide. I've been down from the high places for way too long, and the rest of my beautiful children, and my beautiful wives, and the beautiful mountains themselves will all of them be missing me. Think on the sunny side of this. If Bethod don't follow, you get a few nights sat up in the high places as the summer dies, warming yourselves at my fire, and listening to my songs, and watching the sun going down over the mountains. That sounds so bad. Does it? You thinking of listening to that mad bastard? Muttered Tull, once they'd got out of earshot. Witches, wizards, and all that bloody rubbish. He makes it up as he goes along. Logen scratched his face. He's nowhere near as mad as he sounds. He's held out against Bethod all these years. The only one who has. 12 winters is it now. He's been hiding and raiding, and keeping 1 foot ahead. Up in the mountains, maybe, but still, he'd have to be slippery as fishes and tough as iron to make that work. You trust him, then? Asked Dogman. Trust him? Logen snorted. Shit, no. But his feud with Bethod's deeper even than ours is. He's right about that witch. I seen her, and I seen some other things this past year. If he says she'll see us, I reckon I believe him. If she doesn't, and Bethod don't come, well, nothing lost is there. Dogman had that empty feeling worse than ever. He looked over at Crummock sitting on a rock with his children round him, and the madman smiled back, a mouthful of yellow teeth. Hardly the man you'd want to hang all your hopes on, but Dogman could feel the wind changing. We'd be taking one bastard of a risk, he muttered. What if Bethod caught up to us and got his way? We move fast then, don't we? Growled Dow. It's a war. Taking risks is what you do if you reckon on winning. Grunted Grim. Tool nodded his big head. We've got to do something. I didn't come here to watch Bethod sit on a hill. He needs to be got down. Got down where we can set to work on him, hissed Dow. But it's your choice. Logen clapped his hand down on the Dogman's shoulder. You're the chief. He was the chief. He remembered them deciding on it, gathered round Three Trees' grave. Dogman had to admit, he'd much rather have told Crummock to fuck himself. Then turned round and headed back, and told West they never found a thing except woods. But once you've got a task, you get it done. That's what Three Trees' Wub said. Dogman gave a long sigh. That feeling in his gut bubbling up so high he was right on the point of puking. All right, but this plan ain't going to get us anything but dead unless the Union are ready to do their part, and in good time too. We'll take it to Furious, and let their chief Burr know what we're about." "Furious?" asked Logen. Tall grinned. "Long story." Chapter 12. Flowers and plaudits. Jezal still did not have the slightest idea why it was necessary for him to wear his best uniform. The damn thing was stiff as a board and creaking with braid. It had been designed for standing to attention and rather than riding, and as a result, dug painfully into his stomach with every movement of his horse. But Bayaz had insisted, and it was surprisingly difficult to say no to the old fool, whether Jezal was supposed to be in command of this expedition or not. It had seemed easier, in the end, just to do as he was told. So he rode at the head of the long column in some discomfort, constantly tugging at his tunic and sweating profusely in the bright sun. The one consolation was that he got to breathe fresh air. Everyone else had to eat his dust. To further add to his pain, Bayaz was intent on continuing the themes that had made Jezal so very bored all the way to the edge of the world and back. It is vital for a king to maintain the good opinion of his subjects, and it is not so very hard to do. The lowly have small ambitions, and are satisfied with small indulgences. They need not get fair treatment. They need only think that they do. Jezal found that after a while he could ignore the droning of the old man's voice, in the same way that one could ignore the barking of an old dog that barked all the time. He slumped into his saddle and allowed his thoughts to wander. And where else would they find their way but to Ardee? He had landed himself in quite a pickle, all right. Out on the plain, things had seemed so very simple. Get home, marry her, happily ever after. Now, back in Adua, back among the powerful, and back in his old habits, they grew more complicated by the day. The possibility of damage to his reputation and his prospects were issues that could not simply be dismissed. He was a colonel in the king's own, and that meant certain standards to uphold. Herod the Great always had respect for the common man. More than once, it was the secret of his victories over his peers, and then Ardee herself was so much more complicated in person than she had been as a silent memory. 9 parts, witty, clever, fearless, attractive. 1 part a mean and destructive drunk. Every moment with her was a lottery, but perhaps it was that sense of danger that struck the sparks when they touched, made his skin tingle, and his mouth go dry. His skin was tingling now, even at the thought. He had never felt like this about a woman before, not ever. Surely it was love. It had to be. But was love enough? How long would it last? Marriage, after all, was forever, and forever was a very long time. An indefinite extension of their current, not-so-secret romance would have been his preferred choice. But that bastard Glokta had stuck his ruined foot through that possibility. Anvils and sacks and canals. Jezal remembered that white monster shoving his bag over a prisoner's head on a public thoroughfare, and shuddered at the thought. But he had to admit that the cripple was right. Jezal's visits were not good for that girl's reputation. One should treat others the way one would want to be treated, he supposed, just as Nine Fingers had once said. But it certainly was a damned inconvenience. Are you even listening, my boy? Eh? Yes, of course. Herod the Great, and so forth. The high respect he had for the common man appeared to have, grumbled Bayaz. And he knew how to take a lesson, too. They were getting close to Adua now, passing out of the farmland, and through one of the huddles of shacks, impromptu dwellings, cheap inns, and cheaper brothels that had grown up around each of the city's gates, huddling about the road. Each one, almost a town in its own right, up into the long shadow of Casimir's wall, the outermost of the city's lines of defense. A dour guardsman stood on either side of the high archway, gates marked with the golden sun of the Union standing open. They passed through the darkness and out into the light. Jezal blinked. A not inconsiderable number of people had gathered in the cobbled space beyond, pressing in on either side of the road, held back by members of the city watch. They burst into a chorus of happy cheers as they saw him ride through the gate. Jezal wondered for a moment if it was a case of mistaken identity, and they had been expecting someone of actual importance. Herod the Great, perhaps, for all he knew. He soon began to make out the name. Luther repeated amongst the noise, however. A girl at the front flung a flower at him, lost under his horse's hooves, and shouted something he could not make out. But her manner left Jezal with no doubts. All these people had gathered for him. "What's happening?" he whispered to the first of the Magi. Bayaz grinned as though he, at least, had expected it. I imagine the people of Adua wish to celebrate your victory over the rebels. They do? He winced and gave a limp-wristed wave, and the cheering grew noticeably in volume. The crowd only thickened as they made their way into the city and the space reduced. There were people scattered up and down the narrow streets, people at the downstairs windows and people higher up, whooping and cheering. More flowers were thrown from a balcony high above the road. One stuck in his saddle, and Jezal picked it up, turned it round and round in his hand. All this for me? Did you not save the city? Did you not stop the rebels, and without spilling a drop of blood on either side? But they gave up for no reason. I didn't do anything. Bayaz shrugged, snatched the flower from Jezal's hand, and sniffed at it, then tossed it away and nodded his head towards a clump of cheering tradesmen crowding a street corner. It would seem they disagree. Just keep your mouth shut and smile. That's always good advice. Jezal did his best to oblige, but the smiles were not coming easily. Logen Ninfingers, he was reasonably sure, would not have approved. If there was an opposite to trying to look like less than you were, then this, surely, was its very definition. He glanced nervously around, convinced that the crowds would suddenly recognize him for the utter fraud he felt, and replace the flowers and calls of admiration with angry jeers and the contents of their chamber pots. But it did not happen. The cheering continued as Jezal and his long column of soldiers worked their slow way through the Three Farms district. With each street Jezal passed down, he relaxed a little more. He slowly began to feel as if he must indeed have achieved something worthy of the honor. To wonder if he might, in fact, have been a dauntless commander, a masterful negotiator. If the people of the city wished to worship him as their hero, he began to suppose it would be churlish to refuse. They passed through a gate in Arnolf's wall and into the central district of the city. Jezal sat up tall in his saddle and puffed out his chest. Bayaz dropped behind to a respectful distance, allowing him to lead the column alone. The cheering mounted as they tramped down the wide middle way, as they crossed the four corners towards the Agrient. It was like the feeling of victory at the contest, only it had involved considerably less work. And was that really such an awful thing? What harm could it do? 9 Fingers and his humility be damned. Jezal had earned the attention. He plastered a radiant smile across his face. He lifted his arm with self-satisfied confidence and began to wave. The great walls of the Agrient rose up ahead, and Jezal crossed the moat to the looming south gatehouse, rode up the long tunnel into the fortress, the crackling hooves and tramping boots of the king's own echoing in the darkness behind him. He processed slowly down the king's way, approvingly observed by the great stone monarchs of old and their advisers, between high buildings crammed with onlookers and into the square of marshals. Crowds had been carefully arranged on each side of the vast open space, leaving a long track of bare stone down the middle. At the far end, a wide stand of benches had been erected, a crimson canopy in the center denoting the presence of royalty. The noise and spectacle were breathtaking. Jezal remembered the triumph laid on for Marshal Varus when he returned from his victory over the Gurkish, remembered staring wide-eyed, little more than a child. He had caught one fleeting glimpse of the marshal himself, seated high on a gray charger, but never imagined that one day he might ride in the place of honor. It still seemed strange if he was honest. After all, he had defeated a bunch of peasants rather than the most powerful nation in the circle of the world. Still, it was hardly his place to judge who was worthy of a triumph and who was not, was it? And so Jezal spurred his horse forwards, passing between the rows of smiling faces, waving arms, through air thick with support and approval. He saw that the great men of the closed council were arranged across the front row of benches. He recognized Arch-Lector Sult in shining white, High Justice Morovia in solemn black. His erstwhile fencing master, Lord Marshal Varus, was there, Lord Chamberlain Hoff just beside him, all applauding, mostly with a faint disdain, which Jezal found rather ungracious. In the midst, well propped up on a gilded chair, was the king himself. Jezal, now fully adjusted to his role of conquering hero, dragged hard on the bridle, making his steed rear up, front hooves thrashing theatrically at the air. He vaulted from the saddle, approached the royal dais, and sank gracefully down on one knee, head bowed, the applause of the crowd echoing around him, to await the king's gratitude. Would it be too much to hope for a further promotion, perhaps even a title of his own? It seemed suddenly hard to believe that he had been forced to consider a quiet life in obscurity not so very long ago. "Your Majesty," he heard Hoff saying, and he peered up from under his brows. The king was asleep, his eyes firmly closed, his mouth hanging open. Hardly a great surprise in its own way. The man was long past his best. But Jezal could not help being galled. It was the second time, after all, that he had slumbered through one of Jezal's moments of glory. Hoff nudged the monarch as subtly as possible with an elbow, but when he did not wake, was forced to lean close to whisper in his ear. "Your Majesty," he got no further. The king leaned sideways, his head slumping, and fell all of a sudden from his gilded chair, sprawling on his back before the stricken members of the closed council like a landed whale. His scarlet robe flopped open to reveal a great wet stain across his trousers, and the crown tumbled from his head, bounced once, and clattered across the flags. There was a collective gasp, punctuated by a shriek from a lady near the back. Jezal could only stare, open-mouthed, as the Lord Chamberlain flung himself down on his knees, bending over the stricken king. A silent moment passed, a moment in which every person in the square of marshals held their breath. Then Hoff got slowly to his feet. His face had lost all of its redness. "The king is dead," he wailed, the tortured echoes ringing from the towers and buildings around the square. Jezal could only grimace. It was just his luck. Now no one would be cheering for him. Chapter 13. Too many knives. Logen sat on a rock, 20 strides from the track that Crummock was leading them up. He knew all the ways. Crummock I fail. All the ways in the north. That was the rumor, and Logen hoped it was a fact. He didn't fancy being led straight into an ambush. They were heading north, towards the mountains, hoping to draw Bethod down off his hills and up into the high places, hoping the Union would come up behind him and catch him in a trap. An awful lot of hoping that. It was a hot, sunny day, and the earth under the trees was broken with shadow and slashed with bright sunlight, shifting as the branches moved in the wind, the sun slipping through and stabbing in Logen's face from time to time. Birds tweeted and warbled, trees creaked and rustled, insects floated in the still air, and the forest floor was spattered with clumps of flowers, white and blue. Summer was the best season for killing, and he'd seen plenty more men die in good weather than in bad. So he kept his eyes open, looking out into the trees, watching hard and listening harder. That was the task Dogman had given him, staying out on the right flank, making sure none of Bethod's boys crept up while they were all spread out in file down that goat track. It suited Logen well enough, kept him on the edge, where none of his own side might get tempted to try and kill him. Watching men moving quiet through the trees, voices kept down low, weapons at the ready, brought back a rush of memories, some good, some bad. Mostly bad, it had to be said. One man came away from the others as Logen watched, started walking towards him through the trees. He had a big grin on his face, just as friendly as you like, but that meant nothing. Logen had known plenty of men who could grin while they planned to kill you. He'd done it himself, and more than once. He turned his body sideways a touch, sliding his hand down out of sight and curling it tight round the grip of a knife. You can never have too many knives, his father had told him, and that was strong advice. He looked around, slow and easy, just to make sure there was no one at his back. But there were only empty trees, so he shifted his feet for a better balance and stayed sitting, trying to look as if nothing worried him, but with every muscle tensed and ready to spring. "My name's Red Hat." The man stopped no more than a stride away, still grinning, his left hand slack on the pommel of his sword, the other just hanging. Logen's mind raced, thinking over all the men had wronged or hurt, or got bound up in a feud with, those he'd left alive, anyway. Red Hat. He couldn't find a place for it anywhere, but that was no reassurance. 10 men with 10 big books couldn't have kept track of all the enemies he'd made, and the friends, and the family and the allies of all his enemies. And that was without a man trying to kill him without much of a reason, just to make his own name bigger. "Can't say I recognize the name." Red Hat shrugged. "No reason you should do. I fought for old man Yol, way back. He was a good man, was Yol, a man you could respect." "Aye," said Logen, still watching hard for a sudden move. "But when he went back to the mud, I got a place with Littlebone. Never saw eye to eye with Littlebone, even when we were on the same side. Neither did I, being honest. A right bastard. all bloated up with victories that Bethod won for him. Didn't sit well with me. That's why I came over, when I heard 3 trees was here. He sniffed and looked down at the earth. Someone needs to do something about that fucking feared, so they tell me. Logen was hearing a lot about this feared, and none of it good. But it'd take more than a few words in the right direction to get his hand off his knife. Still, the Dogman's a good chief, I reckon. One of the best I've had. Knows his business. Careful like. Thinks about things. I always thought he would be. You think Bethod's following us? Logen didn't take his eyes from Red Hat's. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Don't reckon we'll know till we get up in the mountains and hear him knocking at the door. You think the Union'll keep to their end of it? Don't see why not. That Burr seems to know what it's about, far as I can tell. And his boy furious as well. They said they'll come. I reckon they'll come. Not much we can do about it either way now, though, is there? Red Hat wiped some sweat from his forehead, squinting off into the trees. I reckon you're right. Anyway, I wanted to say I was in the battle at an Eward. I was on the other side from you, but I saw you fight, and I kept well away, I can tell you that. He shook his head and grinned. Never saw anything like that before or since. I suppose what I'm saying is, I'm happy to have you with us. Real happy. I are. Logen blinked. All right then. Good. Red Hat nodded. Well, that's all. See you in the fight, I reckon. Aye. In the fight. Logen watched him stride away through the trees, but even when Red Hat was well out of sight, he somehow couldn't make his hand uncurl from the grip of his knife, still couldn't lose the feeling that he had to watch his back. Seemed he'd let himself forget what the North was like, or he'd let himself pretend it would be different. Now he saw his mistake. He'd made a trap for himself years ago. He'd made a great heavy chain, link by bloody link, and he'd bound himself up in it. Somehow he'd been offered the chance to get free, a chance he didn't come near to deserving. But instead he'd blundered back in, and now things were apt to get bloody. He could feel it coming, a great weight of death, like the shadow of a mountain falling on him. Every time he said a word, or took a step, or had a thought, even, it seemed somehow brought it closer. He drank it down with every swallow, he sucked it in with every breath. He hunched his shoulders up and stared down at his boots, strips of sunlight across the toes. He should never have let go of Pharaoh. He should have clung to her like a child to its mother. How many things halfway good had he been offered in his life? And now he'd turned one down and chosen to come back and settle some scores. He licked his teeth, and he spat sour spit out onto the earth. He should have known better. Vengeance is never halfway as simple or halfway as sweet as you think it's going to be. I bet you're wishing you didn't come back at all, eh? Logen jerked his head up, on the point of pulling the knife and setting to work. Then he saw it was only Toll standing over him. He pushed the blade away and let his hands drop. Do you know what? The thought had occurred. The thunderhead squatted down beside him. Sometimes I find my own name's a heavy weight to carry. Dread to think how a name like yours must drag at a man. It can seem a burden. I bet it can. Toll watched the men moving past, single file down on the dusty track. Don't mind 'em. They'll get used to you. And if things get low, well, you've always got Blackdow's smile to fall back on, eh? Logen grinned. It's quite the smile he has, that man. It seems to light up the whole world, don't it? Like sunshine on a cloudy day, that we didn't look for you, after you went over that cliff. Thought you were dead. Can't say I hold much of a grudge for that. I was pretty damn sure I was dead myself. I'm the one should have gone looking for you lot, I reckon. Well, should have looked for each other, maybe. But I guess you learn to stop hoping after a while. Life teaches you to expect the worst, eh? You have to be realistic, I reckon. That you do. Still, it came out all right. Back with us now, aren't you? Aye, Logen sighed. Back to warring, and bad food, and creeping through woods. Woods, grunted Tull, and he split a big grin. Will I ever get tired of 'em? Logen took a drink from the canteen, then handed it back, and Tull took a swig himself. They sat there, silent, for a minute. I didn't want this, Tull. Course not. None of us wanted this. Don't mean we don't deserve it, though, eh? Tull slapped his big hand down on Logen's shoulder. You need to talk it over. I'm around. Logen watched him go. He was a good man, a thunderhead, a man that could be trusted. There were still a few left, Tull and Grim and the Dogman. Black Dow, too, in his own way. It almost gave Logen some hope, that did. Almost made him glad that he chose to come back to the north. Then he looked back at the file of men, and he saw Shivers in there, watching him. Logen would have liked to look away, but looking away wasn't something the Bloody Nine could do. So he sat there on his rock, and they stared at each other, and Logen felt the hatred digging at him until Shivers was lost through the trees. He shook his head again, and sucked his teeth again, and spat. You can never have too many knives, his father had told him, unless they're pointed at you, and by people who don't like you much. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.